Thank you very much. So, hi, I'm Klemens, and I want to start this little talk with a small story that starts in January of 2014. So, back then, I just started studying here, which is the Graz University of Technology, on a very rainy and not super nice day. But at that university, one of the first things that I had to study and learn were regular expressions. And I was not super keen about how they were taught at university, so I thought, how could I make that a bit more exciting to me? So I knew how to program, and I had this little device, iPod Touch. I never owned an iPhone back then because it was just too expensive, but I was excited by the Apple platform. I had a Mac, and I wanted to learn how to build something around that, and maybe I can build something that teaches me regular expressions. So I bought this book, Objective-C 2.0 by Stephen Cohen, because Swift wasn't around yet, and I built the first prototype, which was this little game called Kleenie, which is a crossword type puzzle game around regular expressions, where you have regular expressions on the edges of your crossword and you have to find the solution. And this was quite fun to me, and I came up with all the features that the app definitely needs to have in the very first version, like daily puzzles and push notifications, achievements and stuff I've never touched because I never did iOS development before. So I started to work on that, and then exam season came. So I was still mainly studying, and I had to shift my focus away from programming to doing my exams. And not only the regular expression one, far more complicated ones, like the one you see up here about mathematics that I don't understand anymore. And so a couple of weeks passed by, I passed my exams, and I went back to programming more on Kleenie. But coming back to the app after that break, I couldn't find anything anymore that really excited about me. So the initial reason why I wanted to build the app, learn about regular expression, that was gone. There was nothing fun, nothing super exciting in the app. I could have known that before, because regular expressions, crossword puzzle game, not the most exciting thing. So I stopped working on that and stopped working on iOS development for a bit. And then April in 2014 came, and I was sitting just idly on my couch, and I was rocking this watch back then. And while I was looking at my watch, I had the idea of making a little puzzle game that would just run on a watch-based device, where you get statements like 1 + 1 is 2, and you would swipe up if the statement is correct and swipe down if it's incorrect. Or Graz is the capital of Macedonia, and you would swipe down because that is not correct. And why watch-based? Because the Apple Watch was heavily rumored back then. We knew something was coming, we just didn't know when and what. And I thought, I'm just doing it for iOS using UIKit, and then I can easily port it on the Apple Watch. Yeah, I was very wrong on the easy part. If you did some of the watchOS development early on. But anyway, I started implementing it, and that's the very first prototype that I had, which is just a little mathematically puzzle. So you had 10 + 6 is 16. You would swipe up because that's correct. You get multiple of those in 1 minute and had to solve as many as possible in that minute. And so this happened again. Exam season came up again. I was still fully studying, and I had to shift my focus again. But this time, things were a little bit different, because this time I had a prototype that really excited me, that every time I had a spare minute, I could just pull out and play a few of those, and it was just super fun, to myself at least, and I had this smile on my face immediately while I was playing this, so I knew I wanted to continue working on that. So again, I wrote down too many features that I had to have in the first version, but on the 1st of December in 2014, I finally released my very first app. And by then, the Apple Watch was announced, and we got the SDK for the Apple Watch in February of 2015, and I jumped on it, and Elementary Minute was then one of the first apps that were released on the Apple Watch, one of the first 4 or 5 games. And I could only test it in the simulator, and I was very happy about that, because if you ever played the game on the Apple Watch, you notice that playing something like that is not super fun. But I didn't notice that because I only tried it in the simulator, and I released it for the Apple Watch. And then, through that project, I got the chance to go to WWDC in 2015, which was super exciting to me because I was never traveling alone by then. I never traveled outside of Europe, and I was never at a developers conference. And so going there was a dream come true. And then I had this guy from developer relations who nudged me sitting down for the different things that happened at WWDC. So I sat down for the Apple Design Awards, and then suddenly my face appeared up there, and I didn't know about that. And a few minutes later, I was holding an Apple Design Award in the student category for Elementary Minute in my hand. And thank you. And this is now 10 years ago, and you might wonder what happened since. So at that WWDC, I met the people who work at Fantastical, and I used to work on Fantastical. I worked there when we won the App of the Year award in 2020. I finished my master thesis after far too long time on game accessibility. I released another game called Letter Rooms, which was again a finalist for the Apple Design Awards, and then another game called Ancient Board Game Collection, which again was a finalist for the Design Awards. So I built those 7 apps and games over the years, but I always did it while either studying or working at one of those companies. And I made many more prototypes over the years, but the ones that really pushed through and that really were released were some apps that had something memorable in there, something that could excite me, something that could push me through the rough patches of development, something that just showed it to myself, why am I doing this to myself? And while I was preparing for this talk, I looked at other apps that I really like, and I think they have something similar in there too. So for example, Gentle Streak, one of my favorite apps, this fitness tracker can give you a very insightful little description on how much exercise you can take any day, but it can also break down your exercise, the calories that you burned in the exercise in hamburgers and burritos and stuff like that. So very fun stuff in there, puts a smile on my face every time I interact with it. Or Halite, which you all know, it starts off with this little booklet, and that immediately was so nice and put a smile on my face when I first interacted with it, and I fell in love from it from the first second. Or anything that the not boring apps do. So for example, they made a calculator app that is just a stupid calculator, but it has many little animations and sound effects and just overall haptics. It feels so super nice to use, and it's such a fun little app. And they also made a habit tracker with the single most satisfying checkmark animation, which is just wonderful, and I really, really love it. And all of those apps have something memorable, and all of those apps won an Apple Design Award. So the key takeaway for me is to find something memorable to help you stand out, which is kind of the obvious part here, but it helps you push through the rough patches of development. And when I develop one of my apps, I always run through 4 different phases. I first have an idea, I go to a prototype, I refine the prototype, and then I want to release it. And I want to show you my process with 2 different projects, which are Study Snacks and the Art of Fauna. And Study Snacks is this vocabulary trainer where you get vocabularies like here are colors in Spanish, and you click on study, and they are split into pieces, and you have to put them back together. So for example, in silver in Spanish is plata, and you have to find those bubbles and then put it back together. And you have little physics effects, and it's just very fun to interact with. And the Art of Fauna is a puzzle game based on historical animal art, where you get an image split also again into pieces. I like to split stuff into pieces, and you have to puzzle back the wonderful image together. And yeah, that's the core principle of the Art of Fauna. And coming to the idea. And for me, the inspiration for my apps always comes when I least expect it. So for example, I had one app idea while I was sitting at holiday and was just reading a book and eating some cookies. I had another app idea, I already told you this, while looking at my watch and sitting down idly, or while going to museums like the Escher Museum. And for Study Snacks in particular, I had the idea after watching this movie, which is Ex Machina, which is a sci-fi movie, and it's a very far stretch of coming from a sci-fi movie to a vocabulary trainer, but it happened. I was very tired. And for the Art of Fauna, I had the initial idea while I was just scrolling through Instagram, and I found this channel, which is the Biodiversity Heritage Library, that takes very old books, scans them, and puts on all these beautiful animal images, and you can use them for free because the people who drew them are long gone now. And when I first saw those images, I knew I had to do something with them because they are so beautiful, and I have like 1,000 of those stored somewhere on my disk because they're wonderful. So the key message is to take breaks and get inspired. Afterwards, after I have an idea, I want to build a prototype. And I want to get to a result here as quickly as possible while the idea is still fresh and while I still have something that excites me about it. So at this point, and that might hurt some of you, I don't really care about clean code or an app architecture or a data model. I really just want to have a very quick result. I use familiar technologies. I copy code from other projects. If I use a technology that I'm not familiar with, then I just look up some sample project and copy code from there, or you could just use AI or some other tool to help you get to a prototype very, very quickly. And it's okay to throw away the code afterwards, because after you have built your initial prototype, you know the requirements of your whole project much, much better. And when I build my apps, I only have 2 questions in the prototyping phase. Is it fun and memorable? And can I make it accessible? Because I have a very strong feeling about making apps accessible to blind people, and if I can't make a prototype accessible, then I will just stop working on it. And for Study Snacks, this was the very first prototype. It was written in Swift using SpriteKit, the 2D game engine from Apple, and that was done in like 2 hours. I had hard-coded the animals in there, and they were split also hard-codedly, but it already had some of the elements that you can find in the final product, and having these little physics effects already excited me enough that I knew there is something fun, there is something memorable. I knew how to make that accessible with VoiceOver, so I could continue working on that. And for the Art of Fauna, I started off with an image and then split it just row by row. And that already was super fun to me. I played the same puzzles over and over again, so I knew there is something quite fun, even though it's very, very simple. And I wanted to continue working on it. But the problem is that a visual puzzle game is not super accessible to people who are blind. So I shelved it for a bit and thought of how could I make it accessible to blind people. And then one day I was wandering around the zoo, and then I saw a thing like this, which is a description of an animal in the zoo, with an image of the animal and a text, and I thought I could do something similar for the Art of Fauna. So now you have a puzzle game where on one side you have a image, but you can always click a little button and it reveals the flip side, which reveals a text description of the animal, and you can then decide to either play it on the image side and just thank you. And if you play it on the text side, a blind person can play it, or you can learn something about the animal. And as soon as I have a prototype that excites me, I want to refine it. And refinement is always about nailing the core experience, so nailing the very first impression that a user has and getting rid of some interaction quirks. And I feel very strongly about that this is done much better in person than just over test flight. You can do both, but in person is much better because you can learn so much more from a person that interacts with the app than just getting something they processed already and written down in test flight, because they often also blame some interaction quirks on themselves. They think they are too stupid for certain things, but in reality it's often an UX issue that you will catch by just observing them. And no, you can only get the initial impression of a person only once. So I usually just hand the prototype to one or two people, refine it afterwards, and then hand it to the next people, and go so on until I have something I'm very satisfied with. And you can do this at places like this. This is a games conference where just indie developers come and show off their apps, and can then other random people walk in and try out your apps and give you very brutal feedback about that, because they are not your friends and they don't care about your feelings, but it's very, very valuable to get that kind of feedback. But you can also go to local meetups and show off your app here or at a conference like this. Or you can buy your friends dinner, and then while they are eating, you bring out your newest app creation and kind of force them into trying it out. Works perfectly. And if in that stage, one thing I also want to refine is accessibility. And if I already have an app that is very accessible and that I just did everything that I thought I can do to make it accessible, I head over to the AppleVis forum, which is a forum where people who are blind and low vision can connect and discuss all things Apple. And I usually do a blog post, a forum post there, and ask for feedback from people who are blind and low vision to try out the app and give me some feedback on what I can make it better to make it more accessible. And if you're using SwiftUI, making stuff accessible is very, very easy, so there's basically no excuse anymore to skip on accessibility. So for study snacks, a couple of things changed in this phase. So for example, I initially had a submit button. So as soon as you put something back together, you had to click submit and then continue after that. And that just was cumbersome. Many people complain about it, and so I just removed it, and nobody ever complained about it missing ever again. So that was a good finding. Another thing was that people often said that it felt too static. So I came up with the idea that a bubble grows a little bit as soon as you touch on it, so everything shifts around a little bit, and that makes it feel like much more alive. And the last thing, and the most fun thing for me that I found, was that every time I handed somebody the device for Study Snacks, they immediately tried tilting the device because they thought the bubbles might react to the tilting of the device. But since they didn't, they just moved on and never complained to me about it. But since I observed them, I noticed that I could actually implement it. So in Study Snacks, you can just now move your device around, and you can just flip it also upside down, and all the bubbles will fall out, and then put it back on the other side, and they fall back in again. And this is a very, very fun interaction, and I would have never found it if I not observed my users. For the art of fauna, not a ton of things changed. The main core thing was that I initially thought that puzzle tiles would only connect vertically after they connected horizontally, and I thought this would be fine of a puzzle mechanic, but people expected that they would also stick together vertically. I didn't want to do it because that makes my whole calculation of the drag and drop mechanic much more complicated, because you get very weirdly shaped puzzle pieces that you have to drag around. And the logic behind that was rewritten like 5 times, but now I'm at a stage that I'm very happy with it, and it works quite well, and people also never complained about that anymore. So good finding as well. And after I have something that I'm happy with and that other people are happy with, I want to release it, and I want to release it very quickly. And one way I force myself to do that is through pre-orders, which is a feature of the App Store where you can make a pre-order up to 6 months ahead, and that gives you a deadline when you have to release the app. And the wonderful thing about pre-orders is also you have to think about marketing material early, and if you are like me, marketing is something that I push out as far as I can, but having to think about it early is pretty good and gives you a chance to make screenshots early, make texts early, and then also get feedback from people who watch your App Store page before the app was actually released on your marketing material. And another wonderful thing is that Apple can feature pre-orders as well. So that worked out very well for the Art of Fauna. It was featured 2 times before the app was actually released. And that gave me like 6,500 pre-orders, which are then turned into day 1 downloads. And it's split over 2 days because different time zones, but it is counted as if all those people would have downloaded the app on that same day, and then it gives you very good rankings on the App Store. So pre-orders are a wonderful thing. The second thing is that I want to reuse as much as possible. And I just have those 2 slides to show you some code today, but one of the things that I always reuse is this text style modifier that easily lets me exchange fonts in the app. And the other thing are these theme settings that lets me easily exchange colors in the app. And that helps me during development to quickly iterate over different colors and different fonts, so I can see that I don't like this green, but I kind of like this color, and then I can just change it and live on a new version of the app for a while and see that I don't like this font, but I like this indigo color. And if I keep these systems in the app, I can even make the app a bit more accessible. I can give the people the tools to change my chosen font to something like the Open Dyslexic font, which is more legible for certain people with dyslexia, but also let people exchange colors in the app, that it's more legible for people with low vision or for people who have certain kinds of color vision deficiencies. So it's a design tool for me and something that helps me iterate over stuff more quickly, but it can also make my app more accessible. And things I reuse are view modifiers, extensions, but also privacy policies, localizations, inner purchase logic, sunset haptics handling. So for example, those 2 screens are basically the same, just themed differently in 2 different apps. And lastly, I wanted to talk about the value of reducing scope. So when I made Study Snacks, I came up with a huge list of different things that I wanted to add to the app, and it was, again, far too much that I wanted to have in there, but I had my pre-order in place, so I knew I had a deadline, so I had to skip on a bunch of those features. And having skipped on those features already gave me a list, and every item on that list could be an update. And every update can be communicated to Apple through feature nominations and gives you a chance of getting featured on the App Store. And that worked out very well for Study Snacks, for the widget. So I wanted to do a normal widget at first, and then right after the release, interactive widgets were announced. So I rethought my widget strategy and made this little vocabulary trainer that can sit on your home screen and just gives you 1 word and lets you practice vocabulary on your home screen. And that was fun. I probably would have skipped on it if I wouldn't have skipped on the widget in the first place. And Apple really loves interesting usages of the new APIs. So for Study Snacks, which back then was still called Study with Subwords, They featured it for the iOS 17 release, and before that I had like 200 users a day, and this spiked it to 600 users per hour. So very, very nice thing here. And Apple also loves updates for specific events. So for example, tomorrow is the Global Accessibility Awareness Day, and I have an update planned for the Art of Fauna, and I just recently got this email of I might get featured for that, and we will see how that will turn out tomorrow. And if you have a list of things that you want to add to your app, there's this wonderful package by Antoine, Jordi, and Hede called Roadmap, where you can communicate to your users which features you're planning to add in the future, and your users can then vote on what they are most interested in. So it's a bidirectional communication, so that you tell them what you're interested in, and they tell you what they are interested in. Super nice package. You should really use that. So we went through the 4 phases. The idea, where I get my inspiration, usually where I least expect it. The prototyping phase, I want to get to a result as quickly as possible, refining it, mostly in person, and then releasing it as quickly as possible and forcing myself to do that through pre-orders. And if you are in a situation like me, that you want to release an app, just don't worry too much, get it out there, you will do fine. And with that, I say thank you, and yeah.